I stuck my neck out last weekend and suggested that the week that had just gone by would bring some significant news about West Ham and the future direction of this football club. Well, I got that one wrong because we've had virtual radio silence. Now, despite social media trying to ram down our throats which club Matthias Fernandes is supposedly signing up for every 5 minutes, we've actually had very little news coming out of the club itself. Nothing's happened. But I'm going to stick my neck out again because I genuinely believe this coming week could be the one, or should be the one, where the future of this football club really starts to take shape. Let me add some context. The 30th of June is a date that's really important. It determines the state that we're in financially, which will impact on our PSR situation. And I'll come back to PSR in a moment. Because our finances at this football club are absolutely vital as to how we're going to shape up for the upcoming campaign of trying to win promotion. Now, look, let me just go off on a tangent for a second. There have been protests at the club, protests and marches. Supporters have campaigned for years to see change at the very top of this club. And credit where it's due, those supporters have kept that conversation alive. But in between the turmoil, we've had European football and success. We've moved from our spiritual home to a stadium that not many traditional football fans love. We've seen a number of different managers come in to the club with their own styles, their own philosophies, resulting in different kinds of players being recruited in the transfer window, buying for big money, selling for next to nothing because they don't fit the next manager's philosophy. But one thing that hasn't changed despite all that's gone on is that David Sullivan has remained in control and has been the most influential figure at this football club for the last 15, 16 years. Now I'm going to try and piece all this together, our financial situation and David Sullivan's era. But before I do all that, if you're new to the channel, if you've watched the West Ham Voice before, but yet to become a subscriber, a QR code has appeared in this corner. All you've got to do is click on that, become a subscriber of the channel, free of charge, doesn't cost anything to subscribe if you enjoy the content. So let me crack on. Now, I've been thinking about all of this over the last few days, that something much bigger is about to happen at the club, which is going to trigger a power shift that perhaps some, maybe not, everyone saw coming. And if the reports over the next few days prove to be accurate, we could be witnessing the beginning of the biggest change in ownership and influence that West Ham have seen in the past 15, 16 years. Now, since relegation, we've all been asking pretty much the same questions. How are West Ham going to shape up for the challenge ahead to get promotion back into the Premier League at hopefully first time of asking? How are we going to cope with that financially? Are we going to have to sell our best players? Because as far as agents, other football clubs, ITKs, and social media columns are concerned, we're about to see a mass exodus of all our best players. And yet, despite all those concerns, a week after the transfer window has opened, the messaging coming out of the club has been remarkably calm. No panic, no talk of desperately needing to sell players. In fact, the suggestion seems to be exactly the opposite. And that can only be, well, think about it. Why? What's changed? And the more I look into it, the more I realize there are two separate stories unfolding. One is the reported purchase of more shares by Daniel Kretinsky, and the other is a proposed £90 million cash injection into the football club by the same individual. Now, look, individually, they're interesting stories, but together, they kind of completely changed the whole landscape as far as West Ham United is concerned. There is, of course, the private turmoil that Sullivan is facing, but in this video, I want to try and explain why I think relegation and why what Daniel Kretinsky is doing is going to have a significant shift in how this club is managed going forward. It could be that it's been quietly bringing forward the end of the David Sullivan era. Now, let's start the question every fan is asking. Why are we not panic selling? And why are we not in the financial mire that Sullivan and Brady have always told us we are in? Now, if we'd had this conversation 6 months ago, most supporters would probably assume relegation meant one thing: sell before the 30th of June, balance the books, raise cash, protect ourselves against PSR. Now, that seemed the obvious outcome, but now it doesn't feel like that's happening. Well, doesn't feel like it at all. And that's not by accident, because actually a lot of the financial repair work has already started long before the final whistle confirmed relegation. If you think about last summer and again in January, the club quietly began reducing one of the biggest problems on the balance sheet, which was the wage bill. High earners either left on a permanent basis or on loan. Others are expected to follow this coming summer, but the players that Nuno wants to move on are going to be players that he doesn't need, rather than the players moving on because of financial constraints and financial needs. Now, that doesn't make the financial challenges disappear, but it does mean that the club isn't starting from scratch. The foundations have already been laid. And I think it's a really important point, because sometimes we focus so much on the headlines that we forget what's been done months before. Let's talk about PSR, because I've seen one comment over and over again. A cash injection, if that's what Kretinsky's doing, doesn't help PSR. Technically, that's true. A shareholder can't simply write a check and make PSR rules disappear. That's not how regulations work. PSR is based on financial performance over a rolling 3-year period. But here's the part that often maybe gets missed. West Ham don't pay wages or transfer installments or the bills through PSR. They pay them with cash, with a proper cash flow. And that's why liquidity matters. If Kretinsky has made a 90 million investment into this club, it gives us breathing space. It strengthens cash flow. It allows bills to be paid without immediately having to look at the transfer window to sell a player in order to keep the cash coming in. So instead of asking, who must we sell? You can be asking, who do we actually want to keep? And that's a completely different conversation. Suddenly, you're making footballing decisions rather than panic decisions. So, with the two stories being important in their own right, the buying of more shares by Daniel Kretinsky and the same person investing more money seems to suggest that a power shift at West Ham is imminent. Let's try and break this down with some simple numbers, shall we? So look at the current status and what is being proposed, what's in the pipeline. Now, our understanding as it stands, Sullivan, 38.8% of shares, Kretinsky, currently 27%, Gold Family, 25%, the Trip Smith, 8%, and the Brown Harris Consortium, 1.1%. We've been told Kretinsky is going to buy some of the Gold Family shares, which will increase his sharehold to 43%. Sullivan will remain on 38.8. The Gold Family comes down to 9.1, Smith 8, Brown Harris 1.1. So those figures start to change significantly. But there's more to come. Now, we understand, or I understand, that Kretinsky has paid about £80 million to the Gold Family for those 16% of shares. But that money doesn't go into the club. That's simply one shareholder buying shares from another. So nothing changes inside the football club financially. But the really important transaction is what comes after. This 90 or up to £90 million investment or cash injection into the club. And that's where the story changes. With relegation, it's fair to assume that West Ham are currently valued at anything up to 500 million, let's say about 450, which I think is probably an okay, accurate figure. If an injection of 90 million goes into the football club, that takes the overall valuation to about 540 million. These new shares represent about 16, 17% of the enlarged club? Now, here's the key question. What happens if it is only Kretinsky willing to put that fresh 90 million into West Ham? And by the look of things, he is the only shareholder prepared to do it. That includes David Sullivan. Sullivan has got other matters to attend to. And given his current predicament, it suggests that he's not going to be adding any more cash into the club. But I guess we'll soon find the answer to that when the club accounts become public. So for now, I'm making a calculated guess that any injection of additional funds is coming out of Kretinsky's pockets. And what happens if that amount is realized? Well, the simple answer is everyone else's ownership percentage gets diluted. And the maths is quite interesting. And let's look at those. Because after Kretinsky buys the gold shares, and if he's injected 90 million pounds into the club, you start to see Kretinsky's overall share value going up to 53%. And as I've said, because the other shareholders have not invested, their sharehold dilutes. Sullivan down to 32%, the Gold family around 7.5%, Tripp Smith about 6.5%, and the Brown Harris consortium down to roughly about 1%. But it's that 53% to Sullivan's 32% that's absolutely vital and massively significant. Because for the first time in 15 years, David Sullivan may no longer be the controlling shareholder at West Ham United. Now, when I realised that, everything starts to make more sense. Suddenly the pieces fit together. The calmer approach to the transfer window, the confidence around keeping key players, the discussions about a new footballing structure, the investment, the ownership changes. None of these stories exist in isolation. They're all connected. But once you have a fresh capital in the club, that means you buy time. Once you buy time, that means you don't need to be forced to sell footballers. And once that shareholder provides both the investment and becomes the majority shareholder at the club, the balance of power changes completely. So, is this the end of the Sullivan era? I think so. Perhaps his personal situation has influenced this. The newly formed independent footballing regulator may still have a say in whether Sullivan should retain any shares in a football club, pending the outcome, of course, of his personal issues. But for me, all this aside, I believe that relegation itself has accelerated a transition that may not have happened if we'd have stayed in the Premier League. Because if Daniel Kretinsky becomes the major shareholder, it's not just about who signs the checks. It's about how the football club is run. A more modern structure, greater emphasis on recruitment, on longer term planning, better succession planning, a footballing department that outlives individual managers. Supporters have been asking for that kind of structure for years, and perhaps this is the moment it finally arrives. The first phase of that is the introduction of Niels Koppen, who I understand has had his work permit approved and should be announced as Director of Recruitment pretty soon. He'll work alongside Nuno and Sporting Director Mark Noble to help shape the future of this football club. Another positive benefit, if there is such a thing, from relegation. Not only do we have new ownership, but we have a new footballing structure. So let me just conclude. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Relegation was devastating. No one wanted it. But sometimes major change only happens when circumstance forces it. Had we stayed in the Premier League, I think would any of this have happened? Would Daniel Kretinsky have become the dominant shareholder? Would fresh capital have been injected? Would the football club have moved towards a different structure? I doubt it. Had we stayed up, Sullivan will still be controlling transfers. Matthias Fernandes would have been sold for far less than the 85 million that we're holding out for. And dare I say, several other players would have left for far less than their true value or far less for what we paid for them. But today, I think we're witnessing something much bigger than a financial transaction. I think we're watching control of West Ham quietly begin to change hands. Not through protests, as important as they've been, not through boardroom battles, but through necessity. And years from now, we may look back on relegation not just as the day West Ham left the Premier League, but as the day that David Sullivan era truly came to an end. So tell me what you think. Do you think Daniel Kretinsky becoming the major shareholder is a good thing? Do you think that this investment changes the future of West Ham? And do you believe relegation has ultimately accelerated a complete change in direction for our beloved football club? If you've enjoyed the video, please do hit the like button. Please subscribe on that QR code. Please hit the bell notification for when I'm next on. And please hit the hype button, which allows you to promote this video on YouTube on my behalf. Thank you for watching and listening. I hope it's all made sense, and I'll see you again pretty soon.